Grinding is a word that whenever a reviewer uses it to describe a game, it sends a shiver down many a player's spine. The idea of doing things over and over again, repeating the same actions for either items, resources, or an EXP boost just sounds like hard work. It has implications of mundane drudgery that saps the fun out of an experience. Weirdly enough, many of the games I love have serious elements of grinding in them. Stardew Valley sees you performing the same ritual of farming or tending to animals. Minecraft has an almost insatiable demand on the player to scavenge for resources, while others such as Terraria and No Man's Sky follow suit. In many RPGs, both old and new, there is some form of grinding to level up. In fact, many of the games that I grew up with had serious levels of repetition. But in many of the examples I can think of, such as Stardew Valley, I would never refer to it as grinding. Because that's a horrible word. Instead, with games I love, I often refer to it as something like an addictive gameplay loop. Because for me, the word grind is intrinsically negative. It's similar to the way that I would talk about compromise in relationships. Compromise should never feel like a compromise, which doesn't really make any sense, but it should just feel natural, not like you're giving ground to someone, but more like the natural trappings of living or being with another person. The moment someone starts taking stock of what they've lost or gained in a relationship is a dangerous point for the stability of the union. When someone feels aggrieved over what they've given, that's not compromise, it's sacrifice. Grinding in video games is pretty similar. Repetitive actions, be it killing enemies over and over again to level up, or tending to one's animals to get the product you need to make money or complete the community centre, can be hugely satisfying, and it's often related to some form of progression. But the moment those actions start to feel like a slog is the moment most of us lose the will to live and turn off the game. We may stick with it for a while, hoping that the game breaks the cycle and returns to being fun, but inevitably, if it doesn't, we give up. This is grind. And that brings me awkwardly onto Forager. After all that bad-mouthing about grinding, Forager, a game that I grew to love, is all about grinding. Not only does the game contain elements of doing things over and over again, but in fact many of its fundamental mechanics are built on repetition to the point that I actually believe the developer may be making a critique on grinding. And just to give you an idea of how self-aware the game actually is, the first droid that I got had the words "grind this game" written under it in blue. That was its name. Look, there it is. I didn't type that. That name was the game's choice. And self-aware is good in a video game. Now, the thing is, if you head to Metacritic, it stands with a score of 78 as a review score and 7.5 as a user score. Not bad, a good game, but not exactly setting the world on fire. I've seen Forager referred to as an incremental game, which is something that, honestly, I can't deny. But incremental is not intrinsically a negative, and seeing as many of the reviews out there, both on and off of YouTube, are a few years old now, I fear that on some level, Forager doesn't get the attention it deserves and is at risk of slipping through the cracks. The point is, it is easy to write Forager off as an incremental game that has an addictive but grind-ridden game loop. But Forager is more than this. For me, it's special in a number of ways that I'm going to explain. It's why I chose the title of this video, in defense of Forager, a game that I feel, despite its very positive status on Steam, gets a little bashed at times, far more than it deserves. Now, notice a moment ago that I said I grew to love Forager. Grew to love is not exactly the most glowing of opening phrases about a game. If my wife said I grew to love Roy, I'd be a little bit devastated, but I'm not trying to take anything away from the title when I say this. Before playing Forager, I did a little bit of research, as I often do, to avoid wasting time or money on something that would down the line be ultimately disappointing. Luckily, I saw it was included on Game Pass, so I wasn't going to waste any money in the worst case scenario, but still, time is too precious a commodity to squander. Before pressing the download button, I saw that Forager ticked a number of boxes that I looked for in a game. An indie title, dungeons, boss battles, puzzles, cute graphics, resource gathering and management, structure building, farming, and comparisons with Stardew Valley, Terraria, and Zelda didn't hurt to say the least. It sounded exactly like something I wanted to play, and you'd be forgiven for thinking it was love at first sight, but it wasn't. What actually happened was I downloaded it, played it for a few minutes, didn't really get hooked, quit it, and fully intended to uninstall it. Now, I think there's a very good reason this happened that I'll talk about shortly, but probably the fact that I hadn't had to pay for it directly meant that I didn't persevere with it as much as I should have. And this is where the story should have ended. But it didn't. Now, as a bit of backstory, just before I downloaded it, I'd mentioned to a close friend that I was thinking of playing it. After 2 weeks after I'd played Forager for a few minutes for what I'd thought was the first and last time, my friend called me while I was on my PC. He asked me whether or not I'd recommend Forager as he was looking to play something new. I replied, "What the hell is Forager?" In 2 weeks, I'd gone from being full of hope to forgetting even the name of it. Upon him explaining a little bit further, I feigned the penny had dropped and replied, "Oh yeah, Forager, I need to play that a bit more," pretending that I remembered exactly what he was talking about. But then, after a quick scan of my messy desktop, there it was, the icon with the name Forager. Despite my intentions to delete this game, for some reason I'd forgotten to uninstall it. I don't know why, maybe a bird flew past the window and I got distracted. But anyway, a combination of guilt, I hadn't played it for longer, and having a new purpose of checking it out for a friend gave me a renewed purpose to click on that logo and boot up the game once more. And this time I didn't play it for a few minutes. I played it for hours. I couldn't stop. I got so invested in it, I'd be thinking about it when the game was shut down. Now, I've felt that for a few games over the years. Project Zomboid, Hollow Knight, Slay the Spire, Stardew Valley, FTL, just to mention a few, and it was just this constant urge for one more play, setting myself targets of things to achieve before I could turn it off. Now, I probably didn't play Forager for the weeks on ends that I did with some of the other games I just mentioned, because, fundamentally, Forager is a pretty short game. Or so it first seems, because the game comes with a surprising amount of depth, and if you play it like you're supposed to, something I'll qualify later, just to complete it will take you around 10 to 15 hours, probably longer, and if you want to do and see everything the game has to offer, you will pump far more hours into it. And to give you an idea of what I mean about a surprising amount of depth, towards the end, when you think you've got everything sorted, you suddenly discover a new area called the Void, which is like Forager's answer to the Nether from Minecraft. And at around the same point, Forager introduces mega bosses that can be summoned and are as tough as nails, as well as nuclear power for some of your machines to make them more efficient. Some of these things that I'm talking about now may well have been added since those initial reviews, but I'll never know as I only came to know the game long after its release. So, what is Forager and why is it so addictive? The aim of Forager is to go from simple resource gathering and crafting items to the point at which the game is pretty much automated. You start off on a small island collecting a few resources like coal and wood, crafting some simple machines such as a forge and a furnace, and you get to the point where you have drones to do your bidding and a production line that no longer needs your attention. On the Steam page's opening paragraph, Forager is described as the highly popular and quirky idle game that you want to actively keep playing. And honestly, I think that while that statement sums up what this game is perfectly, it possibly fails to mention why you want to keep playing this game. At the start, and in the first period of the game, it's all about repetition. Mining rocks for gold, stone and coal, cutting down trees, building forges and other workstations, harvesting flowers shortly before you start crafting Forager's in-game currency that is gold coins. Each time you mine, gather or forage, you gain a bit of XP that fills up the bar at the top of your screen to help you level up. Now, if you were so minded, you could call this repetition element grind. For the first period of the game, you do effectively grind to level up and gather the resources that you need. But the thing is, never once did it feel for me like grinding, because this game is intrinsically linked to a sense of purpose and progression that makes it so satisfying and addictive to play. At the start, as your EXP level increases, stuck on that small island foraging the few items that generate, you slowly craft gold coins which can be used to purchase new islands. That initial grind has the purpose of making your world bigger. From what at the start looks like a very simplistic, few-tiled map, soon sprawls out revealing the game's secrets, including a variety of puzzles that upon completion give you a treasure chest that we'll talk about shortly, NPCs that give you odd little quests and reward you with items, then enemies start to appear that get trickier and trickier, there's a museum that you have to complete, then there are new items, biomes like deserts, frozen tundra, and some kind of demonic realm, and there's even boss battles to take on. From such humble beginnings, the world gets impressively bigger very quickly. And as you grind your level up, you can choose new perks and technologies. Soon perks mean things like you're more efficient at mining or better at killing. You open up things like fish traps, which makes it easier to catch food that you need to maintain your stamina levels. Soon, instead of using the resource gold to make coins, you can build banks that produce infinite amounts of coins without ever needing to do anything but collect. You explore new biomes for different items to fill up the exhibits at the museum or to create new wonderful machines which can make the game easier. While in those early stages you just have one or maybe two forges and furnaces, before long you have multiple spread out over the world, each of which can be set to automatically craft items when you have the resources. Soon you can be building vaults where you store items, and through a perk, the items you craft are automatically collected and deposited there. Where once you had to take on enemies, soon you're crafting towers to defend your base. And then why wander around aimlessly foraging for berries and wheat when soon you can build a windmill to craft seeds and build a little farm? Then of course there are drones later on which can gather resources or attack enemies, and it effectively makes the game automated. In short, what I'm trying to say is that this isn't just an idle or incremental game. Well, not at the start. Rather that it becomes one. What starts off with pure grind, gathering resources over and over again, soon opens up new tech and perks to make the game get easier, to become incremental, to eradicate that grinding feeling. And this is what I mean when I think that the game is somehow a critique on grinding. Now, if you look at the Wikipedia page about incremental games, two interesting things get mentioned. Number one, according to Anthony Pecorella in his GDC Summit talks, the first idle game was attributed to Progress Quest 2002 by Eric Fredrickson, which is a parody of MMORPG's stats and auto-attack. Number two, when talking about mechanics, it says, the mechanism provides moments of joy spread out through the gameplay to counter boredom and grinding feeling. So, if the whole purpose of incremental games is to counter grinding, and the first game of its kind was apparently a parody of grinding, then perhaps the developer, Mariano Cavallero, chose the mechanics of going from grind to a game that almost plays itself to make a commentary on grinding in games, that grind can be replaced, or that it can still be fun. But what makes this game special for me is the fact that the grind, as self-aware as it is, never really feels like grinding, even though it makes no attempt to disguise itself as just an addictive gameplay loop. What actually happens is that the whole experience becomes addictive. I sat there playing it for hours to get to the point where I didn't need to play it. Now I suppose you could leave the computer running while you go for dinner or a night out at the opera, not sure why that came to mind, and depending on you not starving or getting murdered, you could come back to a huge stockpile of gold and resources and get everything that you need, and you could totally play the game that way. But it's not really the way the game is intended to be played. The tagline says it's an idle game that you want to actively keep playing. So turning off your screen while you chow down on a burger is kind of like playing Monopoly as the banker and dipping your hand in the bank whenever you need cash. Well, not exactly, because it's not cheating, but it's not how the game is meant to be played. You are meant to grind, and it feels good when you get to the point at which you can concentrate on other things you need to do, like slaying bosses, solving puzzles, and stocking up the museum. It's effectively split into two parts, grind and idle. The grinding section is so strongly linked to progression that it feels purposeful. You open up the map, upgrade your equipment, meaning things like killing and collecting is more efficient. You find new items in treasure chests, which makes things quicker, like automatically collecting fish traps. And when you are rewarded with no longer having to grind, and it gets to that idle stage, you still want to play it so you can finish everything off. And when I said it's split into two halves, it's not like it's crudely divided, more a seamless transition. The grinding at the start is all about getting the basic materials you need. Cotton, iron and gold ore, stone and coal. These can be turned into things like bricks and iron bars that in turn can be used to create more advanced materials. It's this part that can be automated, but as I said, the emphasis is on materials, having a constant supply of materials. You have mining rods to collect the initial basic resources, or automated fish traps and turrets to get you the other things you need, and once they feed into the production line, you effectively have an unlimited supply. But this is the thing I think needs clarifying, because this is not an idle game, it's an idle game you want to play. Despite the fact you have a supply chain, there are other things you need to do. You still need to find rare items for advanced weapons, you have areas to discover like the Void, museums to fill, and even super bosses that you summon. The point is the game doesn't stop when the fundamentals are automated. Now, you can in truth start automating stuff pretty early on, and you can get to the stage of it being idle-ish pretty quickly if you want. I personally didn't. I really enjoyed the initial stages of grinding, maybe, I don't know, I'm a sadist, but the length of the game and the ability to automate as soon as you wish, pretty much, which means the length of this game keeps it pretty fresh, and that is part due to the fact that you have some level of decision on at which point the game becomes incremental. Like I said about compromise, it never gets to the point when its grind feels like grind. And that, for me, is the first thing which makes Forager special. Somehow, it has arrived at a point which I can say, here, grind is good. The second special reason for me comes from the developer, Mariano Cavallero, or HopFrog SA as he's also known. Quite clearly, this is a dev who is passionate about games. Forager was his passion project. In fact, in a part of the game, he tells a story of his struggles with getting the game off the ground. He dropped out of school to become a dev, he learned how to program, but unfortunately nobody was interested in what he was developing at first. He then ran out of money, he moved back home to live with his mum, who invested her life savings into her son's gaming projects. It was at a game jam that he started to develop Forager, but again eventually ran out of money. Before giving up, Mariano participated in one last competition in which he won a trip to the USA to show off his work. Somebody that he met at the conference was actually late to a meeting that he had to get to because he was stuck, engrossed playing Forager. The person that he was actually meeting came to look for him and then also discovered Forager. The person that he was due to meet worked for Humble Bundle, and Mariano was offered a publishing deal for Forager. And for me, that is a wonderful tale. This is an amazing story of a person who fought to get his game out there. He ends by saying that we are all foragers, and that he was now able to work with a dev team. The passion here is palpable in the same way you can feel the love behind games like Stardew and Hollow Knight. Now, I've been very glowing about my love of this game, but now let's get on to a darker point. Why does Forager, in my opinion, get bashed a little bit too much? Honestly, I think there are a few reasons. Firstly, I'll talk about my experience. Like I said, it wasn't love at first sight, and I'll tell you why. You start off on that tiny little island and the game tells you to mine something, then build a furnace, and then it leaves you to your own devices. While many games just kind of let you get on with it, like Hollow Knight, I think what happened here was it wasn't evident as to the scope and scale of the game or how to get there. I collected some resources, built a couple of things, and then got overwhelmed that resources were dropping so slowly and I wasn't really sure what to do. In short, it felt a bit grindy. Ironically, which now I realise was both right and wrong for the wrong reasons. Without either knowing what you're doing or how big the world will get and what you're doing it to achieve, the first 20 minutes somehow felt laced with bad grind. And that is why I only probably played it for a few minutes. Then, on top of that, I think that the comparisons with Stardew Valley don't help. Now, these are comparisons that the game devs have actually made about Forager themselves, and it's actually there on the Steam page, so it's not just reviewers who have cast what I think is a bit of a shadow. Sure, there are some similarities. It started out as a single dev product like Stardew. It has farming, resource gathering, cute graphics, and even a museum to fill. But Forager is not Stardew Valley. Forager is about growing and expanding your world, while Stardew Valley is more about making the most and filling the world that you live in. Stardew Valley has ritualistic and addictive game loops. The whole day life cycle is based on farming, and then on top of that, there are other activities like caving that you can do in your spare time. In contrast, Forager is more about getting items to progress the game. There's not just one ritual that you need to do over and over again. Now, in Stardew Valley, you can also get to the point at which you can automate your farm pretty much with things like sprinklers, but you still have so much to do around your farm at all times, and you don't really get to that stage for a long time. Possibly, in my opinion, what Forager is most guilty of is trying to do too much and not niching down on one element of gameplay to make that addictive. Its combat may be too light for some, while the farming isn't maybe involved enough, and then the puzzles, which at times seem to be not rooted in logic and lend themselves to solutions on wikis. However, I think that if you consider Forager as one thing rather than made up of individual gameplay elements, it is brilliant as a singular product, and that it doesn't need to try and stand on the shoulder of giants. Another reason I think it gets bashed is honestly the nature of the parts of its game. Number one, most people don't like grinding. No matter how much I tell you that this is good grind, some people will still be put off by that word. And then to boot, it becomes an idle game. These games, well, they're not for everyone. A game which can play itself will possibly be too vapid a prospect for some. Finally, I think we need to talk about updates. I said at the start of the game, it has been updated since some of those early reviews. Now, I've only played the game since the latest update, so I can't give a fair analysis on how things have changed. But, very interestingly, apparently in 2021 there was meant to be a further multiplayer update for the game. This has since been cancelled with, according to TechRaptor, Forager's main developer HopFrog has announced that the Forager multiplayer update is cancelled due to a poor codebase and poor overall standards by his former development team, which sounds like... Now, HopFrog SA did say at the time he still wanted to work on Forager and had another Forager-related game in the works, which sounds awesome. Following HopFrog SA's initial announcement about a week later, two of the developers on the project spoke out about the situation, which TechRaptor also reported. It reads, "Two Forager developers have accused the game's creator of proverbially throwing them under the bus in a Patreon post about the game's multiplayer being cancelled, which prompted them to speak out publicly about issues the game has behind the scenes." The article went on to talk about disorganisation and low pay, which is a sorry ending for such an amazing story. But that silence we've had, well, it makes me wonder whether we'll ever see something for Forager or Forager related. And sadly, about Forager, to a certain degree, the game may remain unfinished on what was initially envisaged. It's really sad that a developer started off solo, went on to build a team, and it ended ultimately in such a fashion. And since that cancellation news, the game has been pretty quiet. Also, according to some I've spoken with, the original promised updates were all pretty delayed. Now, while most gamers are forgiving, these update issues can lend some people to vent and bash the game once more. But, back to that eerie silence, I honestly hope that the experience over the last couple of years hasn't put HopFrog off. That while setting himself tough time limits, and the multiplayer being cancelled, that Forager will still get some more content down the line, because it deserves it. Perhaps if there's something that we can learn from Eric Baroni and Stardew Valley, it's just to say that an update is coming, and not to set a time limit. But, to summarise, I just think that Forager is a bit misunderstood, undermined by words like incremental and grind. I think that its Steam page mentioning words like idle game and Stardew Valley doesn't help its cause. But this is a brilliant game, all about progression, in which grinding is good and purposeful, a game which you want to get to an incremental stage to discover everything that it has to offer. And I know that the word addiction, even in gaming, is pretty darn negative. But I didn't get addicted because it tricked me into thinking that grind was good, but rather that its sense of progression and purpose was so satisfying and fun. While I've used the word addictive when talking about things like Slay the Spire, Project Zomboid and many others, I never felt I need to qualify it as a good thing. But here I do, and to quantify that addiction, I have now played it solidly 3 times. 3 times addicted and 5 minutes if you include that 4th time, till I played it no more because it was fun. The 3rd time I got addicted was recording footage for this video. I thought, well, maybe I'll get a few hours and then I'll have enough, but, well, that few hours turned into a few more and you can guess the rest. So there you have it. My defense of Forager, a game I honestly really enjoyed, but through its core mechanics, I get that it won't be for everyone. Let me know in the comments below what your take on this game is, or indeed if you have any questions or suggestions of another game to cover. But from me today, all it leaves me to say is thank you very much for watching, and this is Roy McCoy, out.